Well done. Those are the two words that should drive every Christian CEO with every decision, every action, and every component of the vision that they have in their life. Well done are the two words that motivate me and my company, CEO Experience, to help Christian CEOs throughout their journey to make sure that when they get to heaven, they'll hear those two words and know that they've done their job well here on earth. Welcome to another episode of Business Ideas with Ken Gosnell. Today we're going to be talking about a component of your business that every leader deals with in order to hear the words, well done, effectively. Time management is a key critical aspect to business success, and good leaders know how to manage their time. Poor leaders manage their time poorly. One of the most important aspects of time management is the time that you spend with your teams. Teams are critical to any successful business. What I find is that many business owners don't know how to spend time with their teams effectively, or even what they should do when they're with their teams and spending time with their teams. So today I want to walk the Christian CEOs that listen and watch this program through 5 critical aspects of how to interact with a team. Every successful CEO who hears the words well done understands that if they're going to build a better organization, they do so by building a better team. I made a mistake early in my career and life, and that is that I didn't value the time that I was spending with my team and often let time escape. I'd spend it on extra projects or things that I thought were important to the critical growth of our business, and yet those things ended up not being so important. What I find is that if leaders will focus on the meetings that they have with their team, their interactions with their team members, that they can propel their business forward, often find more space and room for them to do the analytical and critical thinking that they need to do, and help the morale and culture of the organization explode because people are now on mission under the clarity of the leader. When the leader is clear, everybody in the organization and everything in the organization becomes clear. What I did was I began to look at how Jesus spent his time. I think that's critical for us as Christian CEOs and CEOs who hope to hear the words well done. And what I found is there were 5 ways that Jesus interacted with his team throughout the gospel accounts. One of those ways is what I would call inspirational meetings. If you want to talk in the terms of meetings, Jesus had multiple times and multiple interactions with his team where he cast a vision about what was to come. He wanted them to not only think about what was important today, but what they did today that would impact the tomorrows. One of the biblical business principles that I write about in the book Well Done, that's set to be released in early 2020, is this biblical business principle of doing things today that impact today and tomorrow. Jesus understood inspirational meetings were just that they were a time to gather his team together to talk about what's coming next, to do some vision casting, to look into the future so that they understood where they were going to go and they could make decisions today on how to get to where they wanted to go tomorrow. I find several what I call inspirational meetings in the Bible. I think one of the most profound is found in Matthew chapter 28 when Jesus calls his disciples together in the very last words that he speaks before he's taken to heaven. And that is, he says, hey, go into all the world and teach and preach the good news, baptizing people in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Do you catch that vision? Go into all the world. That's an inspirational type of a gathering. That's an inspirational type of a meeting where Jesus is telling them what they do today is important tomorrow, that here's the vision of what we're trying to accomplish. Jesus would often talk about vision throughout his ministry. He would talk about that he's going to the Father. He's going to build a place for the disciples in the future. He talked about that he was going to become king. He was heading towards that direction. I find that these inspirational meetings are really critical for every company, and yet most companies and CEOs don't practice them. We share just enough information, just enough data, just enough analysis to feel comfortable thinking that we've communicated to our teams, and we often, in that case, leave our teams discouraged, frustrated, and disheartened. These inspirational meetings are important for any CEO and business owner as they cast a vision of why they're doing what they're doing in their company and why it's important. This idea of time management and how Jesus spent his time to well done was one of the key aspects of our feature in this executive guide called Strategic Impact Moments with Your Team. We've got many CEOs now that are requesting these executive guides. They're one part journal, one part magazine, and one part strategic coach. It's a guide that's about 50 pages in length where we take a biblical business principle and we apply some business application for the CEO to really think about how do they apply God's principles in their life and in their business. I'd encourage you to go to www.ceoexperience.com and download a free CEO executive guide for your use. Now, if you do that, one of my team members or I will be happy to talk you through the toolkit that's in the back. These are a set of tools that we use with executives and CEOs on a monthly basis. We release this guide on a monthly basis as well. And if you'd like to subscribe to that, you can send me an email at kengosnell@ceoexperience.com. That's kengosnell@ceoexperience.com. I believe every leader needs a retreat, and Jesus took retreats to get away to make sure that his vision was clear so that he knew how to inspire his team. And I believe that at the lowest case scenario, you should get a guide subscription for $100 a month, but it allows you to spend some time on your own where you can walk through this guide. I tell CEOs to take about 2 hours once a month to begin to work through the win activities, the tools in the back, the experience questions, and of course to read the guide itself. But this is just one of 5 ways that Jesus spent his time, this inspirational meeting. We talk about the other components in the guide, and I'll share them with you in the next few minutes in our program together today. In the guide, we also have what we call a Kingdom Impact section. We also have some bonus material, a next level leader section, endnotes and additional resources, plus the CEO toolkit. So it is a very robust program for any CEO who wants to get on the learning path and wants to include more of God into their business. Give yourself a retreat by getting the executive guide on a monthly basis. Now, in the executive guide that we talked about, we will also go on and talk about a second type of meeting that Jesus had. So he definitely had inspirational meetings. I would also say that Jesus had accountability meetings. These were times when he would send off his disciples and he would ask them to come back and give a report or an account of what they did and how well they did. Jesus tells several parables in the Bible about accountability meetings. One of those is the parable of the talent that I like to talk about so much. The master went away. He gave his servants some responsibilities, and when he came back, he expected to have an account. Jesus in Matthew 10 sends out the 12 to go heal and cure diseases and have the power of the authority on them. And but when they come back, he's asking for a report. He wants to know how well they did. That's accountability meetings. You could also call those clarity meetings. But we need to have those in business as well, that people are doing their task and their responsibilities. They come back and they give a report on where they're at, how far they've gone, and what they've done. I think those things are really critical to our success as leaders, to understand if we're walking and people are doing walking together and people are doing exactly what we've asked them to do. Sometimes one of the questions that I get from CEOs is, how often should I manage my people? We don't want to be micromanagers as leaders or CEOs in an organization. So sometimes that can be a tough question to answer, but I have a simple rule of thumb, is that I think should be 3 checkpoints on any project or task, especially if it's important, and maybe even the more critical to the success of an organization, the more checkpoints that we should have. But I always like to have an accountability meeting about 10% into the project, making sure that we're on the same page, because usually we communicate when we start a project and we say, this is what we're trying to accomplish. But somewhere along the way, if we're not careful, we begin to go in separate directions. And if we can get together at 10% in, a tithe of a project, if you will, then all of a sudden we have a better opportunity to bring it back if it starts to be heading in a different direction. I like to check in about 50% of the project. We're about halfway done, and so I want to report on how's the project going. Are we on time? Are we on budget? What obstacles will we overcome? What obstacles do we see that's going to be coming in the future? And then I like to check in about 80% of the project's completion, because I want to stick the landing. And I believe the 80-20 rule. And so I want to get that 80% of the project right there. We're going to come close to ending. Let's make sure that we end it well. And those are all accountability meetings. Another accountability meeting is what we would call a performance review. I think that's an accountability meeting that we need to have in an organization. And it's a time to check in and talk to our team and staff and talk about, are they reaching their full capacity or not? And what changes need to take place in order for us to reach that peak performance. So Jesus had accountability meetings, and I think it's important that every CEO and leader spend their time on keeping people account or providing clarity so that they can go out and reach their peak performance. Jesus had a third type of meeting. I called it an educational meeting. You might want to call it a growth meeting in your company. But I find it interesting as he was interacting with his disciples, many times he would tell a parable. And one day they asked Jesus, why do you tell these parables? And Jesus told his disciples that he did it because he wanted people to seek a deeper level of learning. And so he would often tell his disciples, here's the true meaning of this parable that I told. Those were educational meetings. You can't expect your team to be better unless your team grows each year. Too many teams stay the exact same and organizations stay in the exact same place year after year after year after year because they've never been asked to grow. They've never been asked to think about something new, to think about something different. That's why we include in our executive guide every month what we call a next level leader section. That's our chance to talk to the CEO of any company that subscribes to the guide or attends one of our retreats to say, this is the information that you ought to take back to your team. This is how you ought to teach it in a lunch and learn format, or even copying the information to give it out and pass it out to your team. But somehow the leader should be challenging their team to grow. For example, in the next executive guide that's being released is this executive guide called How to Become a Market Leader. And we know that that's important in business. And in that executive guide, the next level leader section is a challenge to team members on how they can become a market leader in the business they operate on. So maybe reading up on somebody else that's a thought leader in the industry and bringing that information in. And we give a series of ideas and concepts to the next level leaders in the organization so that they can propel your business forward. Their opportunity to grow, and as they grow, the organization grows as well. It's a big aspect of what we should be doing as Christian CEOs and leaders. Jesus spent an enormous amount of time with his team, and yet we often don't value our team enough to spend that time with them. But the success of our organization is really going to be about how successful the people on our team are. If we've got growing people that are learning and acquiring new skills and developing and paying attention to market changes and being ready to pivot and bring ideas to the table and work together effectively as an organization, our organizations will succeed. We'll build it to the fourth generation. If our people in our organization stop learning, the company is doomed to be stagnant and stop growing. It's critical that we have these educational moments or these growth moments with our team. The fourth type of meeting that Jesus had is with his team is what I would call exploratory meetings. And this is an interesting one, and many companies miss this. This is a secret today. If you'll listen to this, it'll propel your business forward. But every company should invest at least a couple of days a year into what I call exploratory meetings. It's time to gather everybody together where they're focused on one problem that they're trying to solve for their industry or for their particular company. Jesus gives us this example in the feeding of the 5,000. He had an exploratory meeting with his team. He actually had a number of exploratory meetings with his team, but this is one that stands out. Jesus is there preaching and teaching that day for, the Bible says 5,000 people. That was probably 5,000 men, so maybe up to 15,000 people there that day. And they've got a problem. They've got to feed the people. The people are going to get hungry. They don't have enough food to feed everybody. And so Jesus has this moment where the disciples bring this issue to him, and they come up with a solution, which is just send the people away so they can go get food in their own towns and villages. And Jesus challenges his team in an exploratory meeting. He says, no, you give them something to eat. Let's find a solution to this problem. You know, if companies would once a year or a couple times a year set aside a day with a task force or in an organization for a small business or for a small company, and they said, hey, here's the problem that we're dealing with. We need to enhance the customer experience, or we need to grow our company by 10 or 15% next year, or we've got this many errors in our organization and we need to reduce those errors, or we've got this issue or that issue that we need to solve. And they asked the team to come on board and help them to solve that problem, that all of a sudden those companies would be further along and they'd be further advanced. Every organization should have an exploratory meeting. And then the fifth meeting that Jesus had with his disciples is what I call mentoring meetings. Jesus was a master at pulling each disciple aside for a one-on-one session where he could pour into their life, he could listen to their story, give them exactly what they needed in order to improve as a disciple so that they would grow. I think it's important for CEOs to think about the types of meetings that they're having with their team, and are they investing one-on-one time with the key people in their organization? Now, if you have a large organization, it might be hard to have mentoring meetings or one-on-one sessions with each person, but I do think it's really critical for us, and I've seen it as I've looked at the business landscape. I've seen a lot of CEOs and business owners that the more time that they spend with their team members, the more successful the organization is. There was a management movement back in the early 80s called management by walking around. And really, that is a model or an example of this mentoring meetings that Jesus had with his disciples. It was having some interaction, one-on-one time with each of the disciples or each of the team members in order to make sure that you know what they're doing and you can help them to be even more successful in their endeavors in the company. I think it's critical that we do this. I have a friend, Scott Brunk, who owns the Food Pro Corporation, and they have about 150 employees, and every year Scott spends a dedicated amount of time to meet with every single employee and ask them 5 questions that he thinks is critical to keep his finger on the pulse of every employee in the organization. Now, I like that vision that Scott has, that he's spending time, he's talking with each employee, he's listening to them, he's engaging with them, because he knows that the more that they're engaged, the better the company will perform. You see, Jesus had 5 different types of meetings with his disciples, and I think it's really critical if we're going to hear the words "well done" and build a business like Jesus built his business or his kingdom, that we focus on these types of meetings that we have in our organization. As you look into 2020, now's a great time to begin to think about the types of meetings that you have in your organization. That's why these executive guides are so critical and so important for you. And then I do encourage you to think about, like I said, sending me an email or even downloading the free executive guide at www.ceoexperience.com. We've got some exciting executive guides that are going to be released over the next few months. The one on market leadership I've already told you about. The next guide after that is going to be on the 12 biblical business principles that I write about in the book Well Done. This is a companion piece to that executive or to that book that I'm writing. And in this guide, I walk through those 12 biblical business principles that I think are critical for every well-done CEO to master. And then the next guide that'll be coming out is a guide on followership, which I think is an amazing component. The Bible talks a lot about followership, but many businesses and no business school, our MBA program that I'm familiar with, ever teaches a leader how to follow. But I believe that Jesus sets the example for us when he tells us that sometimes leaders ought to step back so the organization can step forward. So we need, as CEOs, to be the best followers in our organization. Jesus started with a call to Peter, his disciple. He said, "Follow me." And I think this followership mentality is really critical. So I'm excited about that executive guide that's completed and finished and we'll be releasing in the early part of 2020. Now let me finish this session today, or this video and this television program, with this really critical aspect of these meetings that Jesus had with his disciples. And catch this. This is important. This will be a big deal for you and for your company if you'll embrace this truth in this principle. And that is this, that a mistake that I made early in my life, and when I led lots of meetings, that I would spend almost 90% of my time running from one meeting to the next, to the next, to the next, that I found that meetings are often very unclear. That they may have an agenda, but what ends up happening, and what I call them unclear, is because everything gets thrown into those meetings all at once. And what I find is that's what ends up happening. We have a component of the meeting that's exploratory, and we have a component of the meeting that's educational, and we have a component of the meeting that's inspirational. And what ends up happening is these meetings become confused and unclear because we don't know what kind of meetings that we're having. But Jesus never did that. Jesus had one meeting at a time. When he had an educational meeting, that was his focus. He completely focused on this principle that he was trying to teach his disciples, and he didn't waver from it. When he was having an inspirational meeting, he had one meeting at that time. He was trying to inspire his team to think about the future and to go on to what's next. He wasn't trying to educate them, or he wasn't trying to have accountability. It was a very clear perspective of Jesus that he had one meeting at a time. When he had an accountability meeting, he was calling to an account the things that had been done or not done so that they could move forward and know what they needed to do next in order to please the master. You see, too many CEOs confuse their companies because they have all these meetings at the same time rather than one meeting by itself. And so here's a takeaway today. I would like for you to think about the types of meetings that you have in your organization. I call this a win activity. And so if you've got a piece of paper that's close to you, or if you watch this video, get a piece of paper and a pencil, and I want you to start writing down the meetings that you have in your organization. If you have a meeting with your administrative assistant or key leaders in your organization or lunch and learns, you just start writing down all the meetings that you have, one right after the other. And then outside of those meetings, on the next column in your page, I want you to write down one of these 5 meetings: inspirational, educational, accountable, one-on-one mentoring session, or exploratory. And I want you to start to think about each one of these meetings. Is there a major theme or focus? And if there's not, then I would encourage you to cross that meeting off of your list. If there is, what I would encourage you to do is start really focusing on the main focus of that meeting, and don't try to make that meeting 2 or 3 or 4 meetings combined. Make it one. You see, when we become clear as leaders, our organization becomes clear. And if we communicate these are the types of meetings that we're having in this organization, and here's why we're having that in this organization, then people can come prepared and ready to learn or listen or be inspired or give an account, because they know this is what this meeting is about. Now listen, this is why this is so critical. Is as a leader and CEO, you will spend more time in meetings than any place else. And you simply, let me put it in terms like this, you simply cannot hear the words "well done" unless you do those meetings well. Catch that. You will not be able to hear the words "well done" in your life unless you lead your meetings well. Now, I would encourage you again to get the executive guide. We have so much more that helps leaders to think about their meetings and how to do that effectively. We go on to talk about in this executive guide the importance of one-on-one sessions, and we know that that's really critical. I wanted to focus primarily on that one aspect of those meetings, and so I wanted to lay the foundation. But then I wanted to cover how Jesus had one-on-ones with his teams, and boy, that's a pretty powerful model for us to examine and to think about. All these things are really critical to our success. Here's what I believe. It's not what I say that's important. It's not even what you write that's important. It's what God writes and what God says. That's what's the most important. And through the CEO Executive Guide, you get an opportunity to hear what God might say to you and to your company as a steward of that business, what he would like for you to do, the marching orders that he gives you so that you can march on to hearing the words, "well done." Well, I hope that in the next few weeks and in 2020 that you end up having some great meetings because they're focused, you know what their meetings are about, and you're following the landscape of what Jesus did as he met with his disciples. Well done. Well done. Those are the two words, I call them the two most powerful words in the English language, but those are the two words that every Christian CEO and every Christian leader wants to hear. And I believe that if you say and focus your meetings in a way that Jesus did, I believe your team, your organization, your customers, they will all say to you, "Well done." Until next time, I look forward to seeing you again on our next episode of Business Ideas with Ken Gosnell. Keep turning into our YouTube channel, or both at CEO Experience or to the Christian Times Network YouTube channel as well. And the Business Ideas with Ken Gosnell is also a streaming option for those of you that have Roku. You can stream it on Roku and catch this episode as well as other great episodes on Christian Ideas with Ken Gosnell. Thank you very much.